So let's take a look at what we have going on here. We went ahead and made this can and textured it in Blender. I'm actually kind of thinking that, so we'll have to script the forward movement on the x-axis. Really, we could go back into Blender and just repaint the face here on the Z, but we can make the forward movement the x-axis and just start our character off. Let's see. Um, X90, we can have it just sort of facing that direction of our camera. But the truth is, we're probably going to have the camera anyway, just following along. So we'll we'll figure that part out later. And I think I haven't really fully. I think I'll have the camera behind the player, like I'll position it behind the can or something. So we might have to do something interesting with the back of the can if we're going to be staring at it for that long. But anyway, let's start with um, creating a script in this video. And what that script is going to be used for is moving our can around. So in our assets folder, right click and go to create folder. And I'm going to make this underscore scripts. And the reason for the underscore is I generally want my scripts folder at the top. I like to access it a lot. That and the art folder. And generally, like any sort of prefabs, I'll put them in their own prefabs folder. In this one, I'll probably put a prefabs folder under PC and NPC just for demonstrational purposes and organization. So let's go ahead and create the C# script and name it character controller. You know what? I'm going to do, instead of character controller, I'm going to name it player movement. And the reason for this is because I really want to start, I want to start early teaching you guys how to break scripts into the smallest components. It's better for readability and if you end up working with another person on your project. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the video, double click this script, and just move it off to the side. Something that I think I definitely want you all to be aware of is, and I think this is in edit settings on a Mac or Unity settings on a Mac, and then on this one it's preferences. Just make your external tools are set to Visual Studio. Mine are set to Writer. If you're using Writer, do that. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to script the character movement, but we're going to use a tool that's built in. So at your top level here, where we created the empty game object, not on our cylinder, we're going to go ahead and add a component, and that component is going to be a character controller. And this gives us some nice functionality that we can use when we're scripting our character. Make sure that your capsule collider, this is what, like it will detect attacks and stuff like that, is up, maybe towards the middle. We're just going to increase the height a little bit and then increase the radius like that. And then that's pretty good. I mean, if you don't want your character to get hit, too far on the top of the head, you can move it down like that. All right, so I'm going to kind of shift between these, forgive me. So let's save this. And we also want to add our player movement script that we just created. So let's shrink these out. And then inside of here, let's go ahead and start adding some functionality. I'd like to add the speed in which this character is going to walk, the rotation speed, and then I want to get the character controller component, and then I want to always look at where I want to keep track of the move direction. So I'm going to go ahead and just sort of pause the video, and I'm going to enter them in here. Let me zoom out just a little bit too. Hopefully that's not too small for you to see. So I'm going to kind of just kind of scroll between this. I would pause the video and just start to type this out. Just like we've done before in other tutorials, it's just the speed is a float. I have that set to 5. The rotation speed is set to 240. We could always adjust that. That's just for the turning. The reason is because I'm going to be using later some built-in functionality that maybe lerps between rotations or checks the identity of the model. And sometimes that stuff needs a little bit higher of a value to move it. This is going to store reference to this character controller so that we can access that. And then I'm just setting the move direction now to 0. It's just the center point. So move direction is vector 3.0 refers to this transform here, and that all of them are automatically set to 0 right off the bat. And that's going to give us a starting point to move from. So let's go ahead and do character controller here, and then equals get component. And I'm going to make this public. In case you just kind of stumbled on this tutorial or this is your first time taking a class with me, when you make a variable public here, you what it does is it exposes it in the editor. So notice right now we have two public variables called speed and rotation speed, but character controller is not showing up because it was marked as private. But now if I make it public here, and I'll get into what this is doing in a second when I press play. So I'm gonna save this. So if I go back in here and before I press play, you'll notice that I have an empty field and it says none here. Now I could grab this and drag it and drop it in here and that'll add it. But what's a better way of doing it is inside this start method. And what this does is this function runs once. And if this is your first time coding or whatever, send me a message. I'll send you a list to someone else's or even my C# tutorials on what variables are, all the way up to data structures. I have this whole series that's on YouTube that covers all of this, and I do it inside of Unity, so it's very interactive. But anyway, so here's character controller. Now when I press play, notice that it goes from none to actually let me get rid of this play maximize and just do play focused. Play unfocused. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so notice now it says can hero, which is the name of our character. And then inside of these parentheses, character controller. So it's getting that character controller. That's what this line of code does. And it automatically gets that component, and it loads it right into that variable name. And that's what gives us access. Now, inside the update function, this function runs every frame. And let's go ahead so we're going to use it just as our default logic to check when our character is pressing buttons. So inside of update, we declare two new variables, horizontal and vertical. And we're storing within that a reference to input.getAxis and then this weird word horizontal and this weird word vertical, forgive me. So what's happening here? Well, if you go to edit and then you go to project settings and you open up input manager here and you expand the horizontal and you expand the vertical here, we're actually referencing this built-in input manager that Unity has. And what we're saying is this horizontal is going to store a value of A or D, A being negative and D being positive, or the left and right arrow keys. And if we look at the vertical keyword here, it's doing S, W, or the down arrow key or the up arrow key. What is this negative or positive value? Well, video games are built on a Cartesian coordinate system. So you can see we kind of have an example here with this grid texture. If my character on the x-axis moves in this direction, this is the forward direction, it's moving negative. If it's moving backwards, the number becomes positive. So what that does is as I'm holding the A key down, we're adding a value from 0 to 1 to this. And then after I release that key, it resets that value. So for example, like if I add, so this is minus 1.47. If I type 1 here on the x-axis, it moved 1 unit. And then when I release it, I'm back to 0. So if I want to go 2 units, I do 1 plus 1, and that gives me 2, and now I'm 2 units back. Now, I really should flip this so that y is positive, but all I'm going to do is update it in the code, and I think it's fine. And it's a nice way to help you think kind of on your feet if things don't always work out how to do it. Now, once we have these values, we need to store the move direction. Remember we created this move direction up here. And what this move direction is going to do is it's going to, on these three axes, here's the horizontal. So this is, the horizontal axis, which if you remember, if we bring up that input manager again, it's under project settings. Horizontal is left and right. So really, we probably want the z-axis to be my horizontal, and then my x-axis to be vertical, because horizontal, the keys are A and D. A and D are my left and right, and that's normally like swaying. So how do we code that? Well, I'm going to say move direction equals a new vector 3. This is just allocating space. And this takes in 3 parameters. So this takes in an x, y, and a z. So if I highlight over this, I believe it shows you that. Let's see. It represents 3 vectors and points. I mean, it doesn't give you as, I mean, if you go over it in Visual Studio, I think it gives you much better. But I can do 0, 0, 0. Oh, there we go. Yeah, it does it right off the bat, which is, I love it. Do you see how this says X, Y, and Z here? Here's X. And so if I enter a 1 here, and I'm going to hit Control S to save this, and I press play. You should make that public. Oh, we're not actually applying it yet to that character controller. That's why. So let's just do that really quick. So character controller. Remember we created this variable up here? Because our character controller is what's going to control the movement. Dot, and then this is a keyword that's built into it, dot move. And then what's the direction we want to move? We want to use this move direction variable. And I'll tie in the horizontal and vertical in a second. So now when I press play, right now Y and Z are set to 0, but X has a 1 value in there. So you can see, let's move that, let's make this maybe 0.1, and then you can see it a little bit better. Just too fast. There's also, what we generally do is, so what this computer I'm on is very powerful, and our frame rate is extremely quick. So if I open up my stats here and I press play, you can see that my frame rate, come on. Oh, I have this error here. It's got to be 0, and then we put an F behind it, and then we save it. Okay, so okay, do you see my frame rate, which is up here? Is I'm getting between like 180 to the upper to 210, 220, something like that. This update is called once per frame. Now, if your video card is weaker than my video card, and your character will move at a different rate than mine. So you might be like, well, how do I normalize this so that regardless of the device or how powerful the computer is? Well, you can multiply it by the time that the computer runs on, which is time dot delta time. So let me zoom out a little bit. Sorry, I know this is a little smaller, but now what happens is if I make this 1, it's going to give me a much smoother and much more normalized movement. So you'll see, instead of it being like jarry, see how smooth and nice that moves? Well, that doesn't really help us in the sense of like, well, how am I going to move this character around? Well, remember I was showing you those keys? There's vertical and then there's horizontal. So I'm going to take this vertical variable here and I'm just going to plug it in where this 1F is. I'm going to leave Y at 0 and I'm going to take this horizontal and I'm going to plug this into Z. And I'm going to save this. And now when I press play, nothing's going to happen. But when I click in this bottom view, you can see I'm pushing A and D and I can move my character forward and back. Now the thing is, remember this is the positive. Here, let me move this over. And let me turn off stats for a second. All right, look at these values. So now I'm pushing W. Do you see how it's adding? It's moving in the positive direction. So a quick fix to this is really just take our CAN model, and then let's take this rotation. Oops. Let's make this minus 90. Let's make the Z 180. Don't mess with this top part. And then my main camera, we could really just kind of move it over here behind the character. And we are going to totally write a script in a bit. And then this could be 90. Just so we can kind of like look at it from above. And we'll write like a nice script that, let's see. Now when I press play, we'll write like a nice script so that you can move it kind of maybe like World of Warcraft or something. So now you can see as I'm moving, I'm going forward and back, but my A and D are still inverted. So what I can do just as a quick fix for even that is, remember, if you're ever like, well, which key was A and D? If you just go to your project settings and you look here and you're like, oh, horizontal was A and D. What I can do is I can just place a minus in front of this variable, and what that does is that flips it. It just says, okay, I'm going to take that value and I'm going to make it the opposite by just putting a minus in front of it. And I'm going to, let's see if we could change it so this thing's not constantly reloading domain every time. So now you can see it's moving a lot like the way I want it to. All right, let's save this. We've got some good character moving around. I think you probably want to, what's it called? Maybe we'll add that, like a jump feature. We'll make this a platform. But let's go ahead and let's go to edit, and then I think it's under preferences, and let's just type in reload here. Let's see, maybe project settings, I think is what I'm looking for, reload. Yeah, and then you want to scroll down until you see this area here where it says enter play mode options. Check that on and leave these unchecked. And so now every time we play our game, it won't constantly reload the domain. All right, so let's, we've got something going on that's pretty good. The thing is, we'd like to give our game designers the option of adjusting the speed. So what we can do is we can just grab our move direction here, and we've already got that saved. So let's see, we've got that. Let's go ahead and just do move direction equals move direction times speed. Grab the speed variable here. Save that, and now you'll notice this is 5. When I press play, my character moves a lot quicker. And I can make it slower. Now he's moving a lot slower. I can make him a lot quicker. So, and we could also play with that value with power-ups and things like that. So we have some basic movement. In the next video, what we'll do is we'll have our character jump when we hit the space bar and rotate in different directions.